Here we go. We got live.
What is that, the donut?
Donuts are wonderful.
Yeah, please help yourselves. There's
Take more.
it's
before I
here to be
take it
eaten.
The donut was really good.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, you convinced me.
Good,
Didn't
please.
take much.
Get them out of my
Jelly
sight.
or
Take
the
'em.
jelly or the custard? Jelly. I don't know which is which.
So Hanukkah is a wonderful holiday, as we all know. There's so much to celebrate, and it is probably maybe even the most widely celebrated holiday. I think it's a close thing. Hanukkah, Pesach, Yom Kippur.
Seder, yeah.
It's but
close.
definitely culturally, and this is a lot of factors to it. There are other religions have their holidays this season as well, which makes it, in America at least, a very festive season. The Jews don't want to miss out on anything. But also, in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, Hanukkah has a very unique significance. It's seen in a lot of mystical works of Kabbalah, of Hasidus, to be perhaps even the deepest Jewish holiday. Now, what's interesting is that Hanukkah is post-biblical, right? Which means that the Hanukkah story happened during the times of the Second Temple, after all the prophets. So it's not at all in the Tanakh, in the Bible. It's the only Jewish holiday that we have which is post-biblical. So even Purim, Purim is after Moses, so after the 5 books of Moses, but it did make it into the writings. So the Megillah, the Purim Megillah, is part of the canon, part of the Tanakh, the Bible, which is a story in itself, how Esther and Mordechai managed to get it there and fought to have that story in. But it is part of the canonized Torah. Hanukkah came even after that. And it did take, there was precedence because of Purim to create a holiday, but as a holiday created by the rabbis that has zero scriptural source. So that, on one hand, can seem to make it less significant than other holidays. Well, it's not in the Torah, it's definitely not from Moses, from Sinai. On the other hand, the flip side is, precisely because it's a rabbinic addition, in mystical sources, that shows that perhaps it's something even deeper than the biblical holidays. I'll tell you what that means. When you have a relationship with someone, in this case it's Jews and God, and I ask you to do something for me, or I command you, right? I'm a master, a teacher to a student, gives instructions, and the student follows. Okay. That shows a certain level of commitment, a certain relationship, you follow the instructions. Even more, two friends or spouses that ask, request, and you follow, it shows even more. You don't have to. You weren't instructed to. It wasn't a command, but you went ahead and did it. Now, if I have a relationship with someone, and they didn't even ask me to do something, but I, on my own, realized what they would want, and went ahead and did it for them, that's the deepest expression of that relationship. I know what they want, and I'm being proactive in getting it. That's a very deep expression of that love, of that relationship. And so when God commands us in the Torah to fulfill the holidays and celebrate them, okay, we celebrate them, we're following the instructions. But when the rabbis realized that a certain event was so amazing, so significant, that they had to create a holiday, it's sort of a realization that came from the people. That's the deepest expression of the Jewish commitment to God. So Hanukkah, the celebration of Hanukkah, is a very deep expression of Judaism. And what it celebrates, the actual story of Hanukkah, we'll discuss in a moment, is also something very, very deep. And the rabbis saw a lot of symbolism in the story. So more than just a celebration of what happened, the details of what happened, how they happened, are very significant and have very deep lessons. And so when the rabbi decided we're going to celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days each year, and they added we're going to light the menorah for those 8 days, they were touching on something deep and profound. And they said they wanted to capture. Is the door open downstairs?
I'm not sure if you
I hear someone knocking.
Something.
Yeah, they're knocking.
Thanks, Pete.
I'm not sure if you unlocked it.
Oh, I thought I did. Thanks, Ken. So they wanted to encapsulate the depth of what had happened in ritual. And the lighting of menorah is not just a simple, we light a menorah to celebrate the menorah. There's actually deep significance in the ritual that they wish to convey the depth of the holiday in that ritual. So we're going to look tonight at one of two of the ideas of the menorah and what they celebrate and what they mean for us. So the prelude to all of that, we're going to have Pete give us a number. Pete, you okay if we do this on video?
Yeah.
All right.
Does everybody know
We'll
the
switch us around.
You don't know the song.
Let Pete sing. He knows the song.
I know how to sing too.
Oh, okay. Well, sure, right?
So that's would be the best. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Yeah. So that'll be it. So I'll do one like verse of music and then we'll come in after that. Oh, sorry.
Beautiful.
Very good. The best I can do.
Nice.
Next time I'll have
Very
the,
nice.
I'll have the words too. Yeah.
In the English, it's the Rock of Ages, isn't it? Rock of Ages.
That they said that. Yeah, that were the English lyrics.
Is
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah, that is the English translation. Yeah.
I don't know the Hebrew,
I don't know that either.
but I know the English.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it sounds beautiful in Hebrew.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some versions that I found. It's outrageous.
One more song, Pete. One more song.
One more.
You can do one day.
That's like Nero Sololo. Oh, that's not it.
Sometimes I lay to the moon and thank God I'm breathing. And I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. When negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around. Because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we won't wanna fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, yeah. Whoa, whoa, one day, one day, one day, yeah. It's not about win or lose, we all lose when we bleed on the souls of the innocent. Blood draws fade, keep on moving, though they wanna stay raging. In these veins, you can lose your way, your way. I drive you crazy, but don't let it fade you away. No way. Sometimes my tears are drowned, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around. Because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we won't wanna fight no more, maybe no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, yeah. Whoa, whoa, one day, one day, one day,
Beautiful, beautiful.
I just learned that now. I was supposed to look at Hanukkah songs. I looked at that and I said, let me.
I don't know if I can compete with that. It's,
Yeah.
Where is that from?
Matisyahu.
Matisyahu. Oh. And the funny thing is one of his mentors is Yitzhak Buxbaum. So coincidentally, we're both friends with Yitzhak, and I guess he didn't know I heard of Matisyahu, and he gave me his paper, his term paper, that he wrote for Yitzhak, and I mean, it was phenomenal. It's some experience. And then Yitzhak said, hey, Matisyahu has a Baal Shem Tov song too, so we both have songs that are called the Baal Shem Tov. It's funny, yeah.
At the end, Pete, you'll sing us your Baal Shem Tov song.
Yeah?
Okay, now we're in the zone.
Yes.
You wrote a song about the Baal Shem Tov?
Yeah.
Oh,
We're gonna hear it at the end.
Actually, like
tonight.
a whole album.
Wow.
Thank you, Pete. That was really beautiful.
Thank you, Pete.
Beautiful.
So, the story of Chanukah, right? We all know the story. In a nutshell, there were, in the prayer for Chanukah, we mentioned Al HaNisim, and we mentioned there's three tones of miracles we mentioned: Nisim, Niflaot, and Teshuot. Nisim, and there's three levels of miracles that happened. There was a military victory, which was, of course, something that shouldn't necessarily have happened. The Maccabees were a small army against this massive empire, but it wasn't something totally unnatural. Then the Jews came into the temple after the Maccabees won, was successful. They drove back the Greeks, or the Seleucids, and they came there and they found the temple a mess. They had to rededicate the temple, and they cleaned it up. They had to get a new menorah. The menorah was broken. They built a makeshift one in the meantime. But it came to light the menorah, and they had no oil. To light the menorah had to be pure oil that had a special seal, like a kosher seal, from the high priest, from the Kohen Gadol. You say very quietly. Okay. And they had a special seal from the Kohen Gadol, and there was none left. They were all broken. And Nachum, you say you sit on the couch. Sit on the couch. What? Sit on the floor next to me. Right here. Okay. So they finally miracle was they found one jar of oil that was able to be used in the menorah in the base of Mikdash, in the temple. And that was a massive celebration. But now they were stuck with only one jar of oil. And to go to make oil, to light the menorah, would take a week. So they need this to last for 8 days. They didn't have enough. So the third miracle was, this is totally beyond nature. The laws of combustion changed. And this small flask of oil lasted for the entire 8 days until they could get new oil. 3 stages in the miracle of Chanukah. Each one of them.
What was the second stage? The military victory, the oil lasting?
They found the oil.
Oh, they
Finding
found
the oil itself was a big
Miracle,
deal.
okay.
And then the oil lasting for 8 days was the third stage in this miracle. Each one of these are significant, and we celebrate all 3 of them. And there are different prayers in the holidays that mention each one of those 3. But definitely, one thing we see significantly is that oil played a major part of this holiday. So I want to speak tonight a little bit what is so significant about oil. And in fact, oil, we celebrate the oil in the traditions of the holiday as well. The menorah, I have here an oil menorah, and that's the ideal menorah to use. Please. Hey, how are you? Okay, come in. So it's the ideal menorah is an oil menorah, and that is because the original menorah of the Beis Hamikdash was oil, and the foods we eat on Chanukah are all eaten because they are made with oil. Latkes fried, donuts fried. So we celebrate the oil. What is so special about oil? Ricky, you have a yarmulke? I want to, you know what?
If he wants, he can use this.
Isaac, you want to bring yarmulke?
I got another.
Is there one on the table?
No one's on the table.
Bring yarmulke food. Bring yarmulke food. Ask mommy. Okay? Don't worry, I'll bring you one. Thank you, Isaac. Ask mommy. So, what is so significant about oil and why we celebrate it? And I think, to the degree, the reason the rabbis instituted the menorah with oil, celebrate the oil, they felt that oil somehow encapsulated the theme of Chanukah. Something what we're celebrating on Chanukah, what they felt necessary to replicate and to have us ritualize, is the oil. What's unique about oil? Any suggestions?
It adheres to certain things like lettuce, like produce. It adheres to it.
It sticks. It's hard to get off.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, it's hydrophobic. It does not completely mix chemically with water. It stays
Right.
separate from water.
Right. So oil doesn't mix well with water. Anything else?
Well, it takes a lot of olives to get has to go through a press. It has to be squeezed out.
A lot of olives get one drop.
The essence, yeah. So
It can be heated without burning.
Okay. So you put water in there, it's going to evaporate, right? And the oil will heat to high temperatures, which makes it dangerous to fry. Okay. So there are a lot of properties to oil, and each one of them we can probably analyze and find meaning to them and symbolism. I want to discuss one or two of them. And this, Victor said, oil doesn't mix well, right? Oil doesn't mix well with water. You put water in oil, it's going to stay separate. It's going to rise to the top, right? And there's something very significant and important about that. And I want to introduce that with a midrash. So the midrash is a body of work that is rabbinic, that explains the Torah, and has a lot of interesting interpretations and background. So the midrash says something like this. The original temple was the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which... The Mishkan was built in the desert when the Jews were traveling to Israel. It was a IKEA-style temple. Easy to build, easy to collapse, and they would travel with it from place to place. When they originally gathered all the materials of the temple, of the Mishkan, They were supposed to dedicate it on the 25th of the Jewish month of Kislev. That was the date set. Everything was ready. The materials were ready to build it for the first time and dedicate the Mishkan. But God told the Jewish people through Moshe, they're going to push it off for a few months. And God wanted that Nisan, the beginning of the month of Nisan, which was the anniversary of going out of Egypt, that's when the temple will be rededicated. And the Jews were very disappointed. They were looking forward to this. They had dedicated so much time and energy to produce the materials and to get them ready, and they suddenly were pushed off. And the Midrash says God told them, don't worry. This date will be a celebration, dedication, sometime later on in history. And indeed it was. It was a celebration. It was a celebration. That is the date. A long time later, over about 1,000 years later, that became the day of Chanukah, when the Jews rededicated the temple. In fact, the name Chanukah means dedication, rededication. So one of the meanings, the main reason Chanukah is called Chanukah, is because on this day, the Jews dedicated the temple after it was ransacked by the Greeks. Okay? Guys, if you want to stay really quiet, okay? So, this Midrash is perplexing. What is about? Why did God push off the date? And what's the significance that it's pushed off, but don't worry, Hanukkah is going to come on the same date? Is there a connection between whatever the disappointment was in being pushed off and Hanukkah? Like, how does it fit? And I heard recently a beautiful teaching that comes on this teaching. Guys, and here's listen carefully. This is the teaching. Hi, Michelle. You can move closer. Come in. I can't see over there. Even Pete didn't notice you.
I feel like we're in the spotlight.
You can grab a chair next to Pete if you want. Pull it wherever you want. Wherever you're comfortable. So here's the idea. Anything you have, an object, a building, a possession, you can lose. But a dream can't be taken from you. A passion, what's inside of you, a yearning, a longing for something, that no one can steal from you. And this is what God was teaching the Jews in the desert. They were a new nation coming out of Egypt. And they were getting so excited to finally have a structure they can connect to God through. A house of worship for God, a Mishkan. And God set a date, but the 25th of Kislev came, God told the Jews, sorry, we're pushing it off. God did give them something on that day. Not a physical temple, not a building. But the disappointment came from a yearning. They really wanted it. They had a dream, a vision. They wanted this temple. They wanted this Mishkan. And that wanting, which came stronger since they didn't have it, guys, that wanting, which, naturally we don't have something, you want it more and more. So that wanting can never be robbed from them. The temple will eventually be destroyed. The buildings of brick and mortar of stones would eventually, historically, get razed to the ground. But the deep desire that the Jewish people had then to have a temple, a desire the Jews had to create a home for God, to have that relationship with God, could not be taken from them ever. And so, at that moment of history, when the Mishkan was pushed off a little bit, then the Jews had that deep feeling. And God says, later in history, this day will be celebrated. And it was to be Hanukkah. Not just because Hanukkah is a dedication of the temple, which they were supposed to have that day. Because Hanukkah is a celebration of that eternal yearning, of that unshakable and unbreakable depth that we have inside of us. we all go through life, and often we face blockages, we have challenges, we're not where we want to be, we're not who we want to be. We have, some people have addictions and have their problems, and we fall into these very dark places sometimes. And even not so dark, but a little darker than we'd like it to be. And our buildings of stone, our edifices that we've constructed for ourselves, our achievements that we've invested ourselves in can be robbed from us, stolen from us. We can lose sight of them, and we seem to be left with nothing. We're stripped bare. But what God was teaching the Jews then is that there's something you have inside of you, an integrity, a soul, a sense of purpose, of vision, of longing, something deep, a feeling that can never be robbed from you, that is always wholesome. When the Jews came to light the menorah, they had to light it with oil. There are other fuels you can use, right? Kerosene. But oil specifically had to be used, and not just oil, but pizza had to be the purest olive oil. From every olive, only the first drop was able to be used, or else already seen to be have sediments in it. So very little oil was produced from every olive, which incidentally is why it would take a week to produce new oil for the menorah. And one of the reasons why oil specifically had to be used is because the lighting of the menorah wasn't just part of the rituals of the temple, the Beis HaMikdash. It was meant to shine a light to the world. The windows in the Beis HaMikdash were built opposite, inverse of regular windows. Not so much today because we have light, but before we had electricity and people relied heavily on sunlight, windows were built where the outside was narrower and the inside wider, so the sunlight would spread out in the room, right? That way you'd have wider sun, wider light. And the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, the windows were the opposite. They were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. Because this was to symbolize the light of the menorah was to bring light to the world. Not that the Beis HaMikdash needed a light from the sun inside. It was spreading light. It was a source of light.
What was the before Hanukkah? What was the menorah lit? In the...
It's a good question. The menorah was lit daily in the temple, from the beginning of the temple until it was destroyed by the high priest or a priest, the Kohen. The Hanukkah menorah is just a symbolic reflection of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. The menorah in the Beis HaMikdash actually had 7 branches, not 9. So it was slightly different. The reason we have 9 is just technical. 8 days of Hanukkah and the Shamash. They had to make it a little different. But the menorah was one of the standard rituals in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, which was done daily by the Kohen Gadol. Which is an interesting point you bring up. It's the only ritual of the Beis HaMikdash that we continue to practice today in some form. There are many sacrifices. There were different offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. The only one that continues to live on is the menorah. And it's not by chance. There are echoes in the Torah before even the temple was built, when God was originally telling Aaron about the menorah, that this menorah was going to be everlasting. Meaning, even post-destruction, there'll continue to be a menorah. And this is why. Everything else in the Beis HaMikdash represented the different behaviors that came along with the structure, with a formal temple. And once that formal temple structure is gone, so are those. But the menorah symbolized the exact opposite of that. The oil of the menorah symbolized something that can never be taken, can never be influenced, can never be destroyed. Which is why it remains. And that's a symbolism of oil. Oil doesn't mix with water, right? It remains wholesome. Other liquids, you throw in outside influences. Pour in water, it dilutes them. They become weaker. They to a point where they'll lose their entire individuality, lose their strength, just become swept away with the tide. Oil, you can pour water. It remains whole. It remains pure. It remains oil. It floats to the top. If anything, it remains on top. So, as people, we are very easily influenced. Influenced by society, by our peers, by our families, by what happens to us in life. We get pushed around, we get thrown around. And we start identifying ourselves with those influences. We start identifying ourselves with those influences, right? That this is me. I become this. Not realizing that this is not who I am. It's who society has told me I should be. It's who I've become because I've been pressured into doing A, B, and C. But it becomes natural to us. And what ends up happening is ourselves become diluted. We just become trying to be like everyone else, trying to fit in, and we become only a shadow of who we are, and we rob the world of ourselves. We rob ourselves of ourselves. But that can never really happen. Because truthfully, the deepest part of ourselves, we all have the oil. Internally, we are wholesome people. We may not always be living on that plane. We may not always be conscious of that part of ourselves. That's who we are. No matter how broken your external life is, inside you're whole. You will always be you. You can never become diluted. So the oil of the menorah, to shine light to the world, to be a beacon of light outside the world, had to come from the pure substance from oil. And that can produce light that isn't impacted, but impacts. And this is, a very profound and important idea. We all want to have an impact, right? What that impact is different for everyone. We all want to have some sort of impact. And we're trained to think that if I want to impact others, I have to please others first, right? So if they are going to respond to me, they have to like me. If they're going to like me, I have to be the same as them. And so what we think is, the more I sort of play the game, the more I fit in, the more impact I'll be able to have. But the opposite is actually true. Because the more you try to fit in, you are not as strong a force to have impact. You've already been impacted. Just by trying to be like everyone else, just by trying to be one of them. The other 7 billion people in the world, you've already lost your impact. You've been impacted. The way to really have a strong impact is by being strong in who you are, in your individuality, in your essence, in who I am. And if I am very confident in myself, then others around me are moved by me, are inspired. I spread light. So it's a two-pronged message. Number one is we always have a wholesome self. That, although we may not always feel it, okay? We may not always feel it, we may not always be in touch with it, we may feel broken, we may feel darkness, we may just, feel very fragmented. Life is just pulling us in all different directions, and people are pulling us in different directions, and we're lost, and we're sinking into this deep, dark hole. But we have to reflect on who I am. Essentially, I will never cease being myself. I have the oil which will never, and has never been, and will never be tainted, diluted, or impacted. And no matter where I go in life, I have that. I am an infinitely significant person. I have this this amazing self that no one else in the world has. I am me, and no one else will ever be me. So that's one of the lessons of oil, which is why on Hanukkah, when we celebrate Hanukkah, the menorah, that is what we're celebrating. On a national level and on a personal level. On a national level, we're celebrating that the Jewish people, like oil, we've been through really challenging times, right? So close to seems that we're going to be diluted off the face of the earth. We're such a small fraction of the population going through such terrible through pogroms and persecution, the Holocaust, and by all odds we shouldn't be here. But yet we remain intact, wholesome. Like the oil, no matter how much you pour on it, it's going to remain there. So on a national level, we're celebrating that. There's a very famous picture, photograph of a menorah sitting in a window in Germany. In the background, there's a swastika hanging up across the road. It's a beautiful picture. What's lesser known is on the back of that picture, of the original, there's a sentence written. And the story is in 1932, it's a date, 1932, it was a Friday night, Chanukah. And the rabbi of the town put his menorah in the window to light the menorah. His wife, right after lighting the menorah, we light the Shabbat candles. Once Shabbat candles are lit, Shabbat begins. But she noticed in the background the swastika. She said, I have to capture this picture. So right before she lit Shabbat candles, she grabbed her camera, took this photograph. And she inscribed in the back, in German, she said, basically, I'll paraphrase, the swastika says the Jews will be no longer. The menorah says the Jews will always be. And this is 1932, right before Hitler rose to power. And she couldn't have known how true her words were about the swastika, but even truer were her words about the menorah. This menorah still lives on with her kids and grandkids in Israel, which they light every year on Hanukkah.
Same menorah?
Same menorah. And this sums it all up. The menorah is a celebration that they'll try to kill us, they'll try to wipe us off. It's impossible. We have God's protection, but we like oil. And we have that pure, indestructible force. Mm-hmm. But it's also a celebration on the personal level of the oil that we have. We light the menorah in the evening, and we come to these candles, and we look at ourselves in the reflection. And we're thinking of our ancestors, the Maccabees. We're thinking of the Jews of history who have stood up at all odds and despite all the costs which they endured. And we think of what the courage they had, and think internally the courage that we have. The oil, the person that I can be, who I am inside of myself. And that is what we celebrate on Chanukah. We're celebrating the indestructible force that is each one of us. On a religious level, on a Jewish level, this means that we have a indestructible relationship with God, a wholesome relationship with God. The soul, as described in Tanya and other works of Chassidus, is chelik Elokah, it's a piece of God. Now, theologically, how that works is a discussion for itself, but we literally have a spark of God. Each one of us has. We're created in divine image. And no matter where we find ourselves, how distant we feel ourselves to be from God, no matter what challenges we've been through, passed, failed, no matter what's going on in our lives, what distractions there are, those are all in the external self. Those are all in the life we live externally. Internally, they're always a part of ourselves that's wholesome with God. There's no such thing as a good Jew or a bad Jew, a better Jew or worse Jew. Those are, destructive terms. They can describe perhaps, in the moment, in behavior right now, who's doing better, doing worse. But as descriptions of the people, they're false. Because the oil may not always be conscious, but it's there. The soul is always there. Every person is as close to God as the day you were born as an innocent child till the day you die. That remains intact, remains wholesome, remains real, authentic. Can never be impacted, can never be tainted, can never be lost. It's your spark of self, your spark of life that you have. And as long as you're alive, it's there, it's who you are. And on a personal level, each one of us is unique. Like each of those candles of the menorah, each one, the first candle, the second candle, each one may stand for something very different. In fact, in the 7-branch menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, in Kabbalah it's described that each one of those branches represented one of the emotions. Chesed, kindness, Gevurah, severity and judgment. And each one symbolized a different soul type. Because although every single person, 7 billion people, are different, there are general soul types that we fit into. 7, and then that subdivides into 7, so 49, and it goes on. But there's, in a very general scale, there's 7 soul types, and each one of us fit into one of those. And so the branches of the menorah, as the candles of our menorah, today on Chanukah, they symbolize different characters, different people. And each one of them is a oil, is a wick that gives forth flame. So each one of us sitting around here, and every person you know, is going through something else in life, is someone different, and has something unique that they can give to the world. Unique they were born for. Something which they were born with, they'll always have. And whether they're on that track or they've lost their path, that's only in how much they're experiencing it. But in one moment it can all turn around. As soon as you reflect inwardly and recognize who you are as a person, you can gather that courage, that strength to be your best self, to be who you are, to realize yourself. I mean, you do that, you realize you are created by God, in God's image, and that is the most wholesome thing you can be. So, that is one of the messages of the menorah and of Chanukah. That each one of us has an indestructible force, has a soul that is infinite capacity. And if we manage to think about it a little bit, meditate on who we are, realize that anything you go through, you'll be able to manage because you know who you are. And not only won't you be swayed around by the seas of society and pulled by the tides, but you will be able to shine light. From your oil, a pure, bright light will come that people around you will be influenced, inspired, and impacted. So, here's something to think about tonight if you haven't lit the candles yet, or tomorrow night we light the candles. You're lighting those candles, but you got to light a candle within as well. Light the fire within. I forget the details, so I may say the story wrong. But a fellow once came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a Yechidus, a private audience. And he, the guy in middle, I don't want to say who it was, I'm not sure. He said to the Rebbe, so can you light my fire? The Rebbe was talking about the soul. Says, the Rebbe says, no, I can only provide a match. The fire you light yourself. No one can light your fire. It's your fire. But we have to light our fire. So when we light the menorah, it should be reflecting what's going on internally. Or if not, then we should be inspired by the menorah which we light. To find our oil lighted a fire, and we should all be aflame. We should be on fire and make the world a better place. Bring that light, the light of our connection to God, our spirituality, and burn the world up in flames. L'chaim.
So maybe Jim Morrison got it right.
Yeah.
My friend. You were going there
We
too,
were
huh?
thinking the same.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Any questions? Anything to add? Anyone?
Yeah, like just carrying the metaphor that before the oil, you have to go through the press. Some people seem to be pressed more than others. And does it necessarily mean that the amount of pressing is commensurate with how much light you can bring?
Perhaps. But it's a deep metaphor because often we go through life, we're on cruise control, and we don't think about who we are and what we really are. We come to a crisis, we're pushed to the wall, we're forced to face ourselves and say, what do I really want? Who am I really? So being pressed, having the challenge, helps us bring forth our oil, right? Helps us realize who we are. So challenges can be opportunities. So sometimes we need to be pressed. We need that pressure externally to be able to figure out or realize internally who we are.
This is very similar to Pesach, Mitzrayim,
Yeah.
constriction.
Pete, we'll finish off one song. Give us a song.
Oh.
Yeah, Peter, yeah.
Whoa, little Pete.
You want to sing?
Awesome.
Rick plays too. Yeah, do you know any Hanukkah songs?
He was learning them today.
Yeah, I was trying.
He's doing
This
his
is
best.
the Baal Shem Tov song.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
help me sing this? or-
I remember what.
Rocks and trees and cemetery stones, and an orphan boy, he wanders alone through the woods of life. He walks with awe, watching with joyful eyes. Classroom walls were heavy on the soul, so he runs away in solitary finds. Sees in a birch farm's words alive, shooting on the books. Light and fire of my joy, dance to the light and fire. Light and fire of my joy. In a crevice home on a mountainside, by packs of wolves and bears near cotton, singing shepherd songs in a wolfskin coat, sealed in a peasant's clothes. Onward to glory he goes, for a promised wife that I didn't even know. Says I seek no walls with the hands of the girl, I will show them Mary. Light and fire of my joy, dance to the light and fire. Light and fire of my joy. Light and fire of my heart's all the joy. Oh, the children, oh, the nights of day, as they walk through the trees. Oh, all the children are dearest to my soul. Dance to the light and fire, light and fire of my joy. Dance to the light and fire, light and fire of my joy. Father's will, Sarah complies, while a brother's shame shall be disguised. Here's your horse, be on your way, Mary, be on your way. Digging lime and clay, singing songs all day, with an urge to serve that I didn't even go, bringing peace and hope to rest upon the shoulders of his joy. Light and fire of my joy, dance to the light and fire. Light and fire of my joy. Light and fire of my joy.